6. The Evil Tower. Maya was putting the glasses away in the kitchen a few days later when a glancing ray of light twinkled off the rim of a cup and reminded her of something. "Hey, Dad," she said, "is it really true that glass is a liquid?" "Aha," said her father, looking up from his book. "Glass. Now that's a truly interesting subject. Fixed, like a solid, but disordered, like fluids. Some say—" It was always a little risky, asking Maya's father questions about science. "Not the super long version, right, Dad?" said Maya. "It was just something Cousin Louise said the other day, and even the glass in the windows here, it does look a little bit like something flowing." "Well," he said, "if I recall correctly, people argued for years and years that the reason some stained glass windows were thicker at the bottom than at the top was because the glass was slowly flowing downhill with time." It was the old man's strange cabinet that came immediately to Maya's mind, with its thick ripples and waves. That was what Cousin Louise had been looking at when she said that odd thing about flowing glass. So Cousin Louise had been right? "Nonsense, of course," said Maya's father. "Old wives' tale." And then he went on to say more about viscosity and crystalline structures, but Maya's mind was elsewhere. She was standing again before that cabinet and watching the shimmering earths in their bottles. There was something hypnotic about that image, like a mad doctor's swinging watch in a bad old film. And yet that was the part of the visit, the crazy old cousin de Fourcroy, that she had been unable to say anything about when she was telling her parents the story. Sets for an opera about a long-ago scientist and his sheep and his guinea pig. Her parents had enjoyed that, it's true, and her father had definitely heard of Lavoisier. "Father of modern chemistry," he said. "Didn't know he'd lost his head, though. Very famous guy. Conservation of matter, right, Maya?" Maya's father had a disconcerting way of assuming you'd been listening very hard in every science class you ever had. Said Maya. "Sure." "Just means nothing goes totally poof," said her father. "A pretty basic idea, you'd think, but the consequences—" "Poor old man," said Maya's mother, accidentally interrupting, but she was obviously thinking of Henri Pierre de Fourcroy and not of the poor headless Lavoisier. And then she had to pause for a moment to cough. That was when Maya's father surprised them all. He had been rummaging around in his pockets, looking through his wallet. Now he held up a little card and waved it in the air like a flag. "Aha," he said, looking very pleased with himself indeed. "Sure enough, Fourcroy. Now, how about that?" "How about what?" said Maya's mother. "What's that thing you're brandishing about?" "A business card, very simply engraved. Henri de Fourcroy, Director, Society of Philosophical Chemistry." Maya's stomach took a strange, slow ride toward her toes. "You remember him," said Maya's father. "He came to see us that very first day." "Oh, yes, with the sunglasses," said her mother. "Attractive young man. And so he's another Fourcroy. I guess they must be everywhere. Maya?" Sometimes an unexpected surprise can have a sort of narrowing effect on the universe, like a funnel. Maya was peering down this funnel at that name, and her mind was running in feverish little circles. Fourcroy, the society, that cabinet, Fourcroy. "But why didn't you tell me he was a Fourcroy?" she said to her dad. "Good golly," said her father. "Was it important? I forgot all about it myself." "Maybe we're even related to him," said her mother, giving Maya a reassuring pat on the arm. "You did say we're related somehow to the other one, the old fellow, didn't you? Here, let's see what we can do." She had been working on a drawing, so her sketchbook was right there at hand. That was what Maya's mother was like, always a project underway. Even back when she was very sick, she had kept a notebook near her bed all the time, in case a picture got into her head and wouldn't leave. So now Maya and her mother scribbled out a rough family tree, with lots of question marks hanging from its branches. In the end, they figured that this old Fourcroy was maybe their second cousin, twice removed. Nothing closer than that, even if his grandmother had been a Lavarotte. For the other Fourcroy, the young fellow from the Société, there was no obvious spot on the branches anywhere. It wasn't a very bushy tree. The American shoot went as far as James and Maya, but there were no first cousins around to thicken things for them. and a great branching of the French side came to a forlorn end in Cousin Louise. "That family almost died out twice, you know," said Maya's mother. "Before the church fell on them, there was the war. They were deported, you know." Only Louise's mother had survived the war, and then she had had a church fall on top of her. Life was definitely not fair. "Do you want to keep this, Maya?" asked her mother, and she tore out the page from her sketchbook with a quick swipe of the hand. From the sketchbook, another picture stared up at them, a fountain sketched lightly in blue pencil and now only about half inked in. Sad cherubs hoisting a banner. Amandine, 1954. Laurent, 1955. "That's the Fountain of Lost Children," said Maya, "by that cafe." "Yes," said her mother. "Odd things from the neighborhood. That's my theme this year. Did you know that was all some big mistake?" "Mistake?" "I went inside the cafe to ask about it. You know I do like to ask about things." She smiled at Maya, one of her quick, dancing smiles. And Maya smiled back. Anyway, turns out there was about a decade where children were disappearing, or so they thought, and lots of hue and cry and fuss, and some benevolent association collected money for that fountain. "Adorably hideous," said the man in the cafe. "They seemed quite fond of it there, in a way. And then, after it was set up, it turned out the children weren't exactly missing after all. Can you imagine? Oh, they'd each wandered off the way children do for an afternoon or something, or been misplaced in a store for an hour by their aunties and been reported as lost. But once you looked more closely into the thing, it turned out they'd all pretty much wandered home." "How could everyone have been so wrong?" said Maya. "Mass hysteria," suggested her father. "Very common, happens all the time." Somehow, Maya did not think that 8 whole children could be rumored to have been lost or abducted or misplaced for a whole decade without anybody noticing they had actually been perfectly fine all along. But her mother shrugged. Some of them, the families had moved away. Others apparently had problems of some kind, weren't in regular schools anymore. Maybe the parents were ashamed. Anyway, the kids had slipped out of the records one way or another. These things do happen. "But the fountain's still there," said Maya. "Oh, yes," and Maya's mother laughed. "The cafe had moved in by then. They fought tooth and nail to keep the fountain accurate or not, so there it still is." Look at it this way. If Maya vanished for a day or 10 years from her spot at the back of every class at the college Paul Sabatier, no one would ever have felt moved to carve a sad cherub bemoaning the loss of her. "Meh," she said to Valco a few days later, when he asked how her French class was going. "The teacher hardly even glances at me. It's like I'm invisible." She thought of Cousin Louise then for a moment and shuddered. "Teachers never notice the ones who don't cause trouble," said Valco. "When I was younger, I was noticed all the time, believe me." He laughed a bit, a nice laugh, and Maya felt the specter of her possible Louise-ness dissipate just a bit. "Still, I'll never, ever fit in," she said, but already more cheerful about it. "Very possible," said Valco. "Likely, even, but you don't have to fit in to be okay. Believe me, I am the not-fitting-in world expert. I have not fit in maybe 5 different countries so far. I am homelandless. I even make mistakes when I speak Bulgarian. But it's no big deal. Not really. It's not the end of the world, right? It's okay." He did look pretty convincingly okay, Maya had to admit, for someone dragged all over the world all his life, even if he was losing his native Bulgarian, which was kind of a scary thing when you thought about it. Let's say you get dragged off to France, and then your parents, for some reason, just plain forget to go back home. When do your ordinary English words for things start to disappear? And what does that feel like when you notice they're gone? "Hey, and how's your little brother doing?" added Valco. "He never even had any French before, right?" "Oh, he's doing great," said Maya. "He always does great. The teacher has already sent a note home practically thanking my parents for bringing him to France. He had tons of friends by the 3rd day. That's just the way he is." And then, to her surprise, she felt almost guilty. She really did love James, of course, with all her heart. After all, from a purely objective point of view, he was probably the most lovable child in the world. Really. But then she opened her mouth to compliment him, and a whine slipped out instead. How pathetic was that? James really wants to climb up the evil tower, she said in a rush. That's what he calls it. Mom's still too tired, so I should probably take him. Maybe Wednesday after school. On Wednesdays, the college got out at noon, and the little kids had no school at all. "How about I come along too?" asked Valco. "I've been under the tower about 1,000,000 times, but I've never actually gone up." Maya was still feeling slightly bad about James at the end of the day, so she spent €5 on a wind-up clown figure with a flashing nose that she had seen him admire in the toy store around the corner. Something about the packaging intrigued her, to tell the truth. One of those rounded plastic containers that resist your scissors to the death. She carved the toy clown out of its plastic casing very carefully and kept the shell. And on Wednesday, Valco turned out to have been totally serious about the expedition to the Eiffel Tower. "Check out my sturdy tower-climbing shoes," he said, showing Maya his sneakers. Whether they were any different from the shoes he wore every other day, however, Maya couldn't have said. James was practically floating with happiness and excitement when they picked him up at the apartment after school. Maya couldn't help but notice the relieved look on her mother's face, too, looking forward to some quiet rest time, probably, while her kids were off climbing iron stairs. Normal, the way any mother might feel. Right? She looked again. It is one of the terrible things you start doing when you get older and wiser. You can't help yourself. You look again. Her mother was listening very intently to Valco at that moment, her cheek propped up on her thin, delicate hand. She must have just asked him a question because her eyes had that interested flicker in them, very dark and alive in her too pale face. "So in some ways, I don't know what I am," Valco was saying, almost wistfully. "Half this and half that by now. It's so bad I only dream in Bulgarian on, odd-numbered days." Then he laughed, and Maya's mother's eyes laughed too, but that wasn't the terrible part. The terrible part was that, even while he was laughing, Valco turned toward Maya just for a second, and on his face were still etched all those things he hadn't yet had time enough to squirrel away properly. How surprised he was by what he couldn't help but have noticed about Maya's mother, how surprised he was, and how sorry. "But, Maya, you never told me your mother was sick." That's what his face said in that very short slice of time. When your mother has been ill for a long, long time, your own eyes get used to it the way calloused hands have gotten used to their oars. You keep rowing on, and you don't look back, not too much, just the next patch of water and the next, until, that is, some kind-hearted person comes into the room who hasn't been there all along, the way you have, and they look at her with their terrible, uncalloused eyes and say, actually, it doesn't matter what they say. Their eyes make your eyes see it all over again, the odd bruises lingering on the side of her paste-colored face, the still wispy short hair, the beautiful, fragile, fading skin. Maya dug her nails into her palm to keep herself steady. "Listen now, you'd better get going," said Maya's mother, still smiling. "I think James may just pop with impatience if you don't head out soon." The Davidsons' apartment was ridiculously close to the Eiffel Tower. You just walked down to the Rue de Grenelle 3 blocks, right past the Lost Children's melancholy little fountain, and there it was, looming up at the other end of a long green park. Looming was a word that turned up from time to time in books Maya had read, but she saw now that nothing on earth, not crises, shortages, dangers, icebergs, could possibly loom as convincingly as the Eiffel Tower, which grew larger and vaster with every step you took in its direction. Before they crossed the last strip of road between them and the tower, they all three craned their heads far back and let their eyes climb up the curving lines way into the impossible air. It remade space all around them. Everything flat gained unexpected, astonishing depth. Maya's stomach began to feel just the slightest bit strange. "Wow," said James. "Wow, wow, wow, the evil tower, and now we get to go up to the very, very top." But the lines for the elevators were incredibly long, the snaking crowds waiting for their turn to buy tickets and zip up to the very, very top covered about a third of that enormous plaza between the tower's feet. "Come on," said Valco. "Look how short the line for the stairs is. This way, we'll walk up." "But I like elevators," said James a little sadly as he trailed along after Valco. He cheered up once they were actually on the stairs, though. It was like climbing up inside the legs of a great machine, climbing up and up and up until beyond the metal lattice the world began to swim. Once they had reached the second floor, Maya had to distract James from the sad news that tourists were not allowed to climb the stairs any higher, so she said he could take a couple of coins from her and try looking through one of the telescopes. It took him a long time to determine which telescope was the best one, but finally it was the glimpse of his very own school down below and to the east that decided him. "You can see the trees in the courtyard," he said. "That's where we play pirates and burglars during recess. Don't wobble me, Maya. And look, there's the salamander house. This is great." Maya looked down, her heart suddenly thudding away as if some secret of hers had been discovered. There it was, indeed, the salamander house, right at the end of the short street far below where James's school was. That much she could see without the help of any telescope. James, his eye glued to the end of the telescope, suddenly began waving his hand in a merry arc. "James, what are you doing?" said Maya. "He's there again," said James, "the man in the window." "Stop that," said Maya. "Let me look." She was not as gentle as she might have been, but the coins would run out in a minute, and fear was unexpectedly bubbling up in her chest. "What man?" Valco asked James. "He's interested in us," said James. "He has glasses like a spy. He talked to Daddy the first day, and when he saw us, he said we were perfect and charming. I think he's nice." "Perfect and charming," said Valco, half teasing. "Are you sure about that?" "That's exactly what he said, right, Maya? Didn't he say that, Maya? Maya!" But Maya was trying to concentrate. She had found the house right away, all its carvings and stone creatures crisply etched into the telescope's field of vision. Maya even thought she could see the door's bronze salamander, its head turned wonderingly in her direction. She moved the telescope a half-inch higher, and there, on his little balcony, was the same dark-haired young man who had been standing there weeks ago, on that first morning in Paris. Who had come out of that door and walked right to their own apartment building and left a business card behind that said, "Henri de Fourcroy, Director"? The very same one. He had what looked like binoculars in his hands. Yes, definitely binoculars. He was looking through them toward the entrance of James's school. Then in one fluid motion he turned the binoculars right up toward Maya and James and Valco. He was looking at them. He was totally looking at them. She dropped the telescope as if it had stung her. "Maya," said James, "give it back. It's my turn." "Not now," said Maya. "Money ran out. Come away from here." "Was he there?" asked Valco. "Who is he?" "Let's go back down," said Maya. At least inside the ironwork of the tower's legs they would not be so visible, so terribly visible. Okay, said Maya to Valco as they descended from step to step to step, and her words came out in a jumbled, jouncing rush. "I forgot to tell you about this part. He's the head of that society thing, the one on the Avenue Rap, but his name is Fourcroy, like the old guy with the sets. Remember I told you about him? So maybe this guy's even a relative or something, since the old one is. But the weird thing is, he paid for us to come to France. I mean, the society did. They gave my dad money, a fellowship, and the apartment, too." She had to pause for a moment to catch her breath. That's how fast they were going down those stairs. "Huh," said Valco, shaking his head. "Are you saying the guy in charge of all the beautiful people is maybe your relative, and he invited you to Paris?" "He didn't say he was a relative," said Maya, "if he even is." They were finally back out in the September sun, no longer filtered through wire safety fences and woven iron. "That was 600 steps," said James. "I was counting almost all of the way. That was maybe more than 600 steps. Maya heaved a sigh of relief, glad to be back on the ground and less visible. But before she knew it, Valco and James had led her right back down the street past James's school, past the old lady always plonked on the bench at the corner, past the spindly tree where the crosswalk ended, and there, right in front of her now, was the salamander on the door again, turning his head right around as if he had a message for her, something to say. "Maya," said Valco, "are you all right?" "It shouldn't be moving like that," said Maya in some distress. "Should it?" "Maya?" "The salamander," she said. "You really don't see it?" "It's metal," said Valco in his sensible way. "I think you'd need a blowtorch to budge it." "Oh, come on," said Maya, grabbing James's hand to pull them all farther down the street to the right, away from the door and the salamander and that building with all its flowing waves of stone. But at that very second, Maya and Valko flattened themselves as inconspicuously as possible against the wall. The door of the salamander house flew open, and a woman stepped through it. She was very beautiful and very young, and her clothes were far too fancy for 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Really, she looked like someone who belonged in a magazine, not on an actual sidewalk, even a sidewalk in Paris. But what was most striking about her was that she was happy, quite glowing with happiness and relief. "Oh, he has saved my life," she was saying to the man coming through the door behind her. "Can't you feel it? He and the Anbar—" "Come, chérie," said the man. "It is a feast to look on you." And it really was. You wanted to stare and stare, or maybe even go up to her and say just anything, in the odd chance she would turn her radiant eyes right on you. And the man was glowing too. Maya had never seen anything quite like it, but Valko poked her sharply in the arm, and she pulled her eyes away from them so as not to be caught staring. The couple turned the other way, heading up the street past the old lady on her bench, and Maya had just given James's hand a brisk tug as a way of reminding him they were actually on their way home, when a low whistle made her look back toward the door of the salamander house, where Valko was standing, quite casual-like, his left leg angled in a slightly awkward way. He had caught the outer door with his foot before it could close. "Well, hey," he said, his voice almost a shadow of itself. "Look at this." And he slipped right in through the salamander door and held it open after him.